joining us here.
All right, go ahead and go.
We're going to call the meeting to order, the Board of Zoning Appeals. It is Tuesday, May the 5th, 2020. It is, I believe, 7:03. Oh, excuse me. April the 28th, wrong date on the piece of paper. April the 28th, 2020, 7:04 p.m. We are through a Zoom type meeting with several individuals. Can we have the roll call, please?
Mr. Fox.
Present.
Mr. McCutcheon.
Present.
Mr. Stinson. Do not believe is on the call. Mr. Clark.
Chad, I believe he's here. He was here earlier. I believe that's him down there. That's not showing his video.
Oh, yes. And Mr. Avery.
Present.
If everybody got an opportunity to look at the February the 25th, 2020 minutes, is there any
Yes.
comments, concerns, or questions, or can we get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
I have a motion to approve by Mr. Fox. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second by Mr. Avery. All those in favor, are we going to do that a roll call vote?
Oh, yes, that has to be a roll call vote.
We need a roll call on all votes.
Yes. Mr. Fox.
Agree.
Mr. Stinson. Mr. Clark. Mr. Avery.
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon.
Agree.
It's 3 out of 5. Motion carries, I guess.
I see that Mr. Clark is on. Is he have a problem with his audio, or Roger, can you hear us?
Les, he was here at the beginning. I don't know what happened.
I know.
But now I don't see him on there.
He's listed,
Okay.
but he has no screen.
Well,
You might want to hit down to left. It says stop video. You might have hit that. You might want to hit start video, but you might have to text him or something.
We need a fourth for action, right?
Can you text him? Or, I mean, it shows him logged on, but he's not getting the audio, or he's getting the video.
Yeah, I don't.
There's a mute button he might have hit accidentally too.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to be. Oh.
Somebody had him.
David may be joining, but yeah, I don't even see Roger anymore.
He might be trying to relog in.
well,
Chad,
let's
you
just
might-
move on. We've got a quorum, so
We got
Okay.
You might
three,
have
so-
disconnected the audio by mistake.
Chad, as the host, you might be able to unmute him. Maybe.
Oh, no, he's not even showing up on my screen anymore.
Mr. Merkley,
is
are we
David on
gonna-
here yet? Well, as long as we have a quorum, we got 3. So, and if
Are
those
we
folks
administering
just
any-
keep,
Go ahead.
yeah, just keep an eye if either David or Roger appear. Let us know. But as long as we have 3, we can proceed.
Yes.
Are we dealing with an oath?
Yes. At this time, everyone who intends to speak tonight or present or testify, I'll administer the oath. If you would raise your right hand, do you affirm under the penalties of perjury that your testimony tonight is truthful to the best of your knowledge and belief? And when you do speak tonight, please acknowledge that you did accept the oath, and we can proceed. Thank you.
Okay. There is no old business. We'll be moving on to new business. We're going to first start out with BZA 2013. It's been tabled. It was the Speedway LLC. Do I have a motion to accept it or to move it to table?
I'll make the motion.
Stewart's going to make the motion to table it. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Oh, well,
All right, we got to do a vote. Sorry.
Yeah, and do a roll call.
Mr.
Roll call,
Fox,
please.
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon,
Agree.
Mr. Stinson, Mr. Clark, Mr. Avery.
Agree.
Oh, I think we have David suddenly, maybe.
Okay. We're going to move on to number 2, which is BZA-20-14. It was a JT Development LLC, filed development standards. It has been tabled. Can I get a motion to table that one?
I'll make a motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. And roll call, please.
Mr. Fox, Mr. Avery,
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon,
Agree.
Mr. Stinson. David, can you hear us? Well, we have Mr. Clark, can you hear us? Can you hear us, Mr. Clark?
Oh,
There he is.
Now we can hear you. We got you.
yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Thank you. All right,
I see David.
we good, Chad?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to move on to number 3. Erica Bruce May filed a development standards variance application for a property at 5415 Highway 62. The property was zoned C2, which is commercial. The proposed development is a restaurant. The docket number is BZA-20-15. Do we have representation?
Yeah, David Sanders, Paul Primavera and Associates, 301 East Chestnut Street, Corning, Indiana, 47112. I did receive and agree to the oath. This is a site that was previously submitted and approved probably, I think 4 or 5 years ago. So it's a little outside of the statute for moving forward. So we're back before you asking for a reapproval. I think there were some variances previously, which I guess are still in effect, some waivers, and then we updated the plans to reflect the current landscape ordinance. We're asking for some waivers and some in lieu for the site. I do have plans here that I can share if we have any questions, but I'll open the floor if you have any questions.
Okay. At this point in time, we'll open up. Chad, is there any letters, comments? Is there any chats that we need to be aware of?
No, not on this project.
Okay, we're free and clear. Public comment. Can we close public comment? Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay with that?
Great.
Okay. Does the board have any comments, concerns, or questions for the applicant?
Yes.
Move to findings.
My daughter.
We're moving to the findings.
Made an offer on it. Well, we've had about half a dozen people interested in it. You're going to beat them to it. I got a Zoom meeting here.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
Luann was forever her speech therapist.
she's been doing that for 30 years.
Chad, we're ready to move to findings.
It's good seeing you.
Okay.
It looks nice. Looks
I'm trying to figure out
See how
who's
backfill was the
actually
porch
talking on
goes?
this meeting.
gravel all the way down.
Dirt,
and that big-
dirt, you're gonna have to make a sale later on, okay?
All right. But you know, this is, commerce moves on. Yeah.
You're gonna have to pretend that you're actually in a
Hey,
meeting.
I got to call my realtor. I'm getting an offer, man.
Okay.
I vote yes on everything. Let's go.
The Board of Zoning Appeals of the City of Jeffersonville, having heard the application for variance described above and all opposition from parties claiming to be adversely affected thereby, does now enter the following findings. The variance of the development standards will not be injurious to the public health, safety, moral, and general welfare of the community. Mr. Avery,
Agree.
Mr. Fox,
Agree.
Mr. Stinson, Mr. Clark,
Agree.
and Mr. McCutcheon.
Agree.
The use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. Mr. McCutcheon,
Agree.
Mr. Avery,
Agreed.
Mr. Fox,
Agree.
Mr. Clark,
Agree.
Mr. Stinson. He's still out. Okay. This 3, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in a practical difficulty. This situation shall not be self-imposed nor be based on a perceived reduction or restriction of economic gain. Mr. Avery,
Agreed.
Mr. Fox,
Agree.
Mr. Stinson, Mr. Clark, Mr. Clark, oh, Mr. McCutcheon.
Agree.
Did we lose Mr. Clark?
Doesn't look like it.
He seems to be still on here, but I don't.
Can you tell him to give you a thumbs up?
He may be muted. He's also got where he can show a hand vote too, but you got to go to more to do that. But mute should be at the bottom left, and more is at the bottom right.
He does not appear to be muted.
He's freeze framed. His
Yeah.
feed is locked.
Yes.
There it is, not keeping up.
Let's move on. Move on.
Okay.
Is that one final, Chad, or are you gonna we done?
Yes, based on the findings described above, the board does now approve this application, so ordered this 28th day of April, 2020.
Gotcha. Moving on, Dennis
Thank you.
Durkee filed a development standards variance application for a property at 316 Hopkins Lane. The property is zoned R1, which is residential. The proposed development, in addition to an accessory structure exceeding city standards. The docket number is BZA-20-16. Do we have representation?
Yes. Dennis Darking, 316 Hopkins Lane. I did agree to the oath. I'm just requesting permission to add on to my existing garage.
Okay. We'll open up for public comment. Is there any letters, concerns, or anything we need to be aware of?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. We'll close public comment. Does the board have any comments, concerns, or questions for Mr. Durkee?
Can we get an explanation of what the purpose of extending the garage is? We're not doing any commercial job or anything out of the garage, correct?
No, all I want is room to park another vehicle and just for storage and just a place to work on projects, nothing commercial.
Okay. No further comments?
Okay. We ready to move to findings?
Yep.
All right. We're ready, Chad.
The Board of Zoning Appeals of the City of Jeffersonville, having heard described above and all opposition from parties claiming to be adversely affected thereby, does now enter the following findings. The variance of the development standards will not be injurious to the public health, safety, moral, and general welfare of the community. Mr. McCutcheon,
Agree.
Mr. Avery,
Agree.
Mr. Fox,
Agree.
Mr. Stinson, Mr. Clark. Oh, Roger's trying to get back in here, but okay. 2, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. Mr. Avery,
Agree.
Mr. Fox,
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon.
Agree.
3, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in a practical difficulty. This situation shall not be self-imposed nor be based on a perceived reduction or restriction of economic gain. Mr. McCutcheon,
Agree.
Mr. Avery,
Agree.
Mr. Fox.
Agree.
Based on the findings described above, the board does now approve this application. So ordered this 28th day of April, 2020.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on, Robert Libbs filed a development standards variance application for a property at the northwest corner of Hamburg Pike and Charleston, New Albany Road. The property is zone C1, which is commercial. The proposed development is a commercial strip center. The docket number is BZA-20-17. Do we have representation?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Jason Copperwhite with Paul Primavera and Associates, 301 East Chestnut Street, Corydon, Indiana. We're representing CBRL LLC, which is managed by Bobby Libbs. And I did take the oath. This is a 1.4 acre piece of property, as the description said, at the corner of Hamburg Pike and Charlestown New Albany Pike. And it backs up to the CSX Railroad. It's a very odd shaped lot, as you can see from the site plan, and it was actually fairly challenging to get something to work here. It's a 5,000 square foot speculative strip center at this point, with parking on basically 3 sides. And again, in order to make it fit there, we had to push it back against the railroad. There are 2 access points, one on Hamburg Pike and one on Charlestown New Albany Pike. And I pushed those back as far as I could to make it practical to get in there. I met with Andy Crouch out there, and he approved those particular locations. It's pretty straightforward. We're requesting basically 4 variances. The maximum structure height, which is a 25-foot, 10-inch parapet wall, and that extra height basically is we have no room to put our mechanicals on the ground, so we need to put those on the roof. Again, it's such a tight, weird site, so we've got some parking projecting into some of the required setbacks. And then this is a corner lot, so it really doesn't have a rear yard. So a lot of the parking percentages, as far as how they're placed around the building, don't really fit. We're calling this 100% front, again, because it has two sides, 2 fronts, and no rear. And then again, it's a modern commercial strip center. And the ordinance still requires gable roofs, which is something that the BZA has not really required on very many projects for a while. You have in front of you the development plan. You have a code compliant landscape plan, a code compliant lighting plan, and then the building elevations, which show the building will be brick veneer with EIFS, glass storefronts, and awnings. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. We'll open up at this point in time for public comment. Is there any letters, comments from anything downstairs or anywhere we need to be aware of?
We did have a few calls on this project. We had a call from Bonnie Earhart of 3823 Hamburg Pike. She just had general questions about how it would fit on the site. We sent her the site plan and some more information, and she hasn't called us back or left any further comment. Belinda McCullough from 3820 Ivanhoe Drive kind of asked some similar questions, had some concerns about maybe traffic in the area and what that could do to her property values. We discussed that with her, and she seemed pretty okay with it after the conversation. We had one other call who seemed adamant that it should be tabled, but we sent him an email with site plans and provided the info that he needed, and he chose not to send any letter or further comment.
Thank you. At this point in time, we'll close public comment. Does the board have any further comments, questions, or concerns for Mr. Copperwhite?
Actually, pardon me, there was one more. I had a Donald and Bernice Briner from 1612 Charlestown, New Albany Pike had called. She just had general concerns, wanted good construction and not just an empty strip center. So I think she had some concerns about making sure there were tenants in there as opposed to some empty strip centers down the street.
Okay.
There is a comment on Facebook just regarding it, short, but it's Mr. Jefferson said strip center. I'm for it.
Okay.
Okay. All right. At this point in time, we'll close public comment. Jason, is there anything that you would need to add?
I just say, I mean, it really has no neighbors. You know, there's nothing directly adjacent to it. It's in a commercial corridor, commercial zone.
Any speculation on the tenant?
No, not really. But my client certainly doesn't want an empty strip center sitting there either. So, but I don't know what that is.
Okay. Does the board have any further comments, questions, or concerns?
Move to findings.
Moving to findings. We're ready to chat. Oh, hold on.
Yeah, real quick, and just for the record, we Shelby is downstairs in the city council chambers. If anyone would show up for an actual, to physically be here for a public hearing. So she's down there and she'll let us know if anyone does appear. So although the governor has allowed us to do this all virtually, we also went ahead and had someone there physically in case they wanted to appear for the public hearing. So.
And she's watching Facebook too for any comments that might come in on the Facebook stream. Yeah.
We appreciate that. We are ready to move to findings.
Okay. The Board of Zoning Appeals of the City of Jeffersonville, having heard the application for variance described above and all opposition from parties claiming to be adversely affected thereby, does now enter the following findings. The variance of the development standards will not be injurious to the public health, safety, moral, and general welfare of the community. Mr. McCutcheon?
I agree.
Mr. Avery?
Agree.
Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. Clark? Oh, he's disappeared again. And Mr. Stinson? He agreed. I saw his face there. And then number 2, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. Mr. McCutcheon?
Agree.
Mr. Avery?
Agree.
Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. Stinson? Mr. Clark? 3, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in a practical difficulty. The situation shall not be self-imposed, nor be based on a perceived reduction of or restriction of economic gain. Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. Avery?
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Agree.
Mr. Stinson? Based on the findings described above, the board does now approve this application. So ordered this 28th day of April, 2020.
Thank you very much.
We're going to move on to number 6. Janet Matthews filed a development standards variance application for a property at 1904 Augusta Drive. The property is zoned R1, which is residential. The proposed development is in the addition of a carport within the allowable setbacks. The docket number is BZA-20-18. Do we have representation?
Yes, this is Janet Matthews. Can anybody hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can hear you. You're a little quiet, but we can hear you.
Okay. Yes, I'm just requesting a variance. I would like to build a metal carport on the back portion of the driveway. The driveway is 11 by 26. I'm going to stay behind the gate. It's going to be 10 by 25 by 7 high. I don't know if you've got pictures that I furnished or diagrams or not. And oh, sorry, I do accept the oath.
Oh, Mr. Merkley?
Oh, did she say she had?
Yes.
Oh, okay, we're good.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought she said no. Apologize. Go ahead. Are you good?
I'm good.
Okay. So basically, the structure that you're building doesn't come out towards the front of the house. It still stays behind or in the portion of the side back towards the back.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. At this point in time, we'll open up for public comment. Is there any letters, comments, concerns, Chad?
I don't have any.
Okay. Nothing from Ms. Moore downstairs? All right. We'll close public comment. Does the board have any comments, concerns, or questions on this one? We'll move to findings.
Sounds good. The Board of Zoning Appeals of the City of Jeffersonville, having heard the application for variance described above and all opposition from parties claiming to be adversely affected thereby, does now enter the following findings. 1, the variance of the development standards will not be injurious to the public health, safety, moral, and general welfare of the community. Mr. Avery? Oh. Mr. Avery?
Agree.
Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Agree.
Mr. Stinson? 2, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. Mr. Stinson? Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. Avery?
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Agree.
3, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in a practical difficulty. This situation shall not be self-imposed nor be based on a perceived reduction of or restriction of economic gain. Mr. McCutcheon?
Agree.
Mr. Avery? Oh.
Agree.
Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. Stinson? Based on the findings described above, the board does now approve this application. So ordered this 28th day of April, 2020.
Thank you. Moving on, Robert Armstrong filed a development standards variance application for a property at the northwest corner of Highway 62 and I-265. The property is zoned HC, which is commercial. The proposed development is a hotel. The docket number is BZA-20-19. Do we have representation?
Yes, Mike Hill with Land Design and Development, 503 Washburn Avenue, Louisville, 40222. And yes, I did receive the oath.
Thank you.
These variance requests are related to a development plan that will be considered by the Planning Commission next week. They're basically related to the fact that our parcel is kind of shaped. It's rather narrow, which presents some design challenges. There's a variance related to building height, to building roof line, and then parking related variance. For the height, the HC zone allows only a 20-foot tall building, which doesn't really work for a hotel. Most hotels, as you know, are 3, 4, 5 plus stories. So with our narrow parcel, we had to go a little higher than your typical 4-story hotel in order to get the number of rooms to make the project work. So we're proposing 62 feet for our building height. This parcel, if you're familiar with it, it's right adjacent to the existing water tower on a Water Tower Road. They're adjacent to the new Bridgepoint Commons development. The water tower will be more than twice the height of our proposed hotel, even with the variant that we're requesting. Our building roof line is flat roof rather than gable roof. Typical on hotel architecture to have flat roofs. And then our parking variance is related to, again, the size of the parcel requires us to kind of spill into the setback area a little bit more than we're allowed to encroach. There is a restaurant attached to the hotel that will also be a draw, we think, to the hotel, which requires parking to be situated such that we've shown it on our development plan adjacent to the restaurant. It's an industrial area. We're adjacent to a water tower, an interstate, a railroad, future commercial development. So I don't really think what we're requesting has any negative impacts on any adjacent property owners, particularly any residential property owners, because there really aren't any right in this vicinity. That's basically a summary request. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. I've got a few slides I can show if that helps as well.
Okay. At this point in time, we'll open up for public comment. Chad, do we have anything that we need to be aware of?
We do not.
Nothing from downstairs from Ms. Moore? All right. We'll close public comment at this point in time, and then we'll open up for the board to ask any questions if they feel it's necessary, comments or concerns. Anybody have anything? Then we will move to the findings.
The Board of Zoning Appeals of the City of Jeffersonville, having heard the application for variance described above and all opposition from parties claiming to be adversely affected thereby, does now enter the following findings. The variance of the development standards will not be injurious to the public health, safety, moral, and general welfare of the community. Mr. Stinson? Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. Avery,
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon.
I agree.
2, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. Mr. Avery,
Agree.
Mr. Fox,
Agree.
Mr. Stinson, Mr. McCutcheon.
I agree.
3, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in a practical difficulty. The situation shall not be self-imposed, nor be based on a perceived reduction of or restriction of economic gain. Mr. McCutcheon,
Agree.
Mr. Avery,
Agree.
Mr. Fox,
Agree.
Mr. Stinson. Based on the findings described above, the board does now approve this application. So ordered this 28th day of April 2020.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We'll move on to number 8, Kyle Kitzmiller.
It looks like, oh, hold on, Mike. It looks like Mr. Stinson might be with us. Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Looks like Mr. Clark joined also.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Clark, can you hear us?
I hear you. I had to move to another device. It kept going down.
Okay.
Gotcha. Hear you good now.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on. Kyle Kitzmiller filed a development standards variance application for a property at 3818 East 10th Street. The property is zone C2 PD, which is a planned development. The proposed development is a multifamily residential building. The docket number is BZA-2020. Do we have representation?
Yes, I'm Kelly Jones with Sayback Wilson and Lingo, 608 South 3rd Street, 40202, and I did take the oath.
Thank you.
I have a PowerPoint if Chad will allow me to share my screen. All right, can you guys see this?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So the applicant on this case is Miller Valentine Group. They're a developer out of Cincinnati. They've been around for about 60 years. Pardon me while I use my Cliff's Notes. They are active in multifamily development in the Midwest, Sunbelt, and Mid-Atlantic regions for over 30 years. And they develop and manage more than 7,000 multifamily units. They have a commitment to high quality luxury apartments in high growth urban and suburban markets. And they do all development, construction, and property management in-house. So this will be their first project in this area, and we're excited that they're here. Let's see. Bear with me as I am switching back and forth from a Mac to a PC. Here is the development plan. I'll get back to that in a minute. I did include a copy of the landscape plan and the lighting plan, which meet the requirements. This is a zoomed in version of the landscape or of the development plan. You can see the building here. It's a 4-story urban style apartment complex with a courtyard in the center. Surrounded by parking. This is Ellingsworth Dairy Drive that comes in off of 10th Street. And I'll show you a slide here in a minute to get your bearings as far as where this is in relation to McAllister's and the new bank. You can see there's an area behind the building. That can be a place for, they're probably going to have some sports courts back there. Exactly which one is unsure. And then there's a future phase 2 expansion over here that will come back before you all when we're ready for it. This is the building elevations. You can see some variation in materials, variation in roof line, lots of windows and balconies on all 4 sides. And then these are the interior elevations that will face the interior courtyard. Again, lots of windows and balconies. This is a project called AG47 that they have recently completed in the Cincinnati area. It gives you an idea of what this will look like. You can see there the nice courtyard with a pool. This one will have a pool, will have similar amenities. The one here in Jeffersonville will be very similar to this. One thing I want to point out that will be different is there's going to be more green space around the building in Jeffersonville than there is in this photograph. It'll be a pretty nice site. This is a photograph of some of the interiors at AG 47. Again, the one in Jeffersonville will be modeled after this development. High design, nice, modern, good materials. Main reason we're here before the BZA today is for some variances. The first one being a parking variance. The Jeffersonville zoning code requires 2.5 parking spaces per unit. We're requesting 1.5 parking spaces per dwelling unit, plus 32 guest spaces. One of the justifications for this is that although there are going to be 190 units, a lot of those are 1-bedroom units. We've got 16 studio units, 96 1-bedroom units, and 78 2-bedroom units. So that's 272 bedrooms. We're providing 317 spaces. I did a little research on some other metropolitan areas and their parking requirements for multifamily. So in Louisville, you've got 1.5 spaces per unit with some applicable reductions for things like TARC proximity. Indianapolis is 0.75 spaces per dwelling unit. Cincinnati is 1 to 1.5 spaces per unit. New Albany's 1 space per unit. Clarksville was 2. So we're not out of the realm of possibility here with 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit plus the additional 32 guest spaces. Then the next variance is related to garages. I had big ideas of going around and looking at all the other M3 developments in the city of Jeffersonville to see if any of those complied. Well, I found 2. I found 2 M3 developments that I could even use as an example. The first is the Villas of Jeffersonville that's there behind Walgreens near Holman's and 10th. And there are no garages in that development. The other one is Stonebridge Apartments, which is right near this development. You'll see that proximity here in a minute in another slide. And they do have some garages, but they only have about 20% of what would be required. They have about 1 garage per 5 units as opposed to 1 garage per unit as the code requires. And then the final variance is related to the dumpster location for allowing the dumpster to be located in front of the building. And technically, we're located in front of the building. The red circle here is where the dumpster will be located. 10th Street is technically between the building and 10th Street, but the front of the building or the front main entrance to the building is actually where this large red arrow is. So if you're looking at the building itself and not its relation specifically to the public right-of-way, then it is sort of behind the building. There's a couple of justifications for this. One being these are the 2 secondary entrances to the building where tenants will be bringing their trash out. So this is more centrally located to both entrances. The other option would be to put it back here in the corner, and that's pretty far away from this entrance, as well as right next to the amenity area. So nobody wants to be out there having a picnic or playing basketball and smelling the trash. So this will be, I think, it's further away from the residential neighborhood that's back here to the back of the building. And it's easily accessible from a trash truck. So a trash truck's going to come in here, come in, empty the dumpster, and then come back out and leave. And they will have less impact to the residences, both in the single family neighborhood behind, as well as the apartment building itself. And this is the exhibit I've referred to a couple of times. This gives you the idea of where this is located in the grand scheme of Jefferson Ridge. You can see the existing McAllister's and Parnelli's building here. There's an existing bank. Google Earth is a little old here. And then there's room for future development all around here. This is retained by will be retained by the original property owner who's been doing a lot of commercial development. They did the McAllister's out here. This piece here is for future apartments like is shown on the development plan. And then this shows you what this apartment development looks like. see the existing detention area and preservation area back in the rear here. And the corner of the building at its closest point is still 306 feet away from Rolling Ridge, which it's quite a distance. And you've got the detention area and you've got the preservation area with all the tree planting that has happened back here. Took a site visit a couple weeks ago with Chad, and things are growing up nicely back there. So I think that with the building being pushed forward, the amenity area, and all of this green space back here, it will lessen the impact that we have on Rolling Ridge. And I guess that's all I have to say, unless anyone has questions for me.
Okay, at this point in time, we'll open up for public comment. Chad, is there anything received on this project?
Yes, we did have a few calls on this. Mr. Sean McPherson had called from 3723 Crown Ridge Lane, had called in. He was upset about the trees that had been cut down on this site prior to development. The prior dealings with the developer had left a little bit of bad taste in his mouth, but not terribly impressed with the project. But we send him a packet with the site plan, landscape plan, and renderings. Haven't heard further from him. Miss Paula Harper had called. She thinks this project's a great idea. It's very needed and good for the city. She owns property in Rolling Ridge as well. And then Dan Wolf had called in with some general questions. He followed up. We sent him the packet. He followed up thanking us for the packet, and the renderings seemed fine with that.
Okay, at this time, can you go ahead and clear the share screen, please?
Yes.
And do we have anything from downstairs, Ms. Moore? Everything good? Okay. At this point in time, if we have no further, we'll close public comment. How about the board? Does the board have any further comments, concerns, or questions for Kelly?
Just a quick question, Mr. Chair. On the dumpster that's positioned on 10th Street, what is the enclosure around that? What's the requirement for that?
So it's still quite a ways back from 10th Street. There will be a whole set of commercial development most likely in between us and 10th Street, first of all. But secondly, the enclosure is going to be split face block with a cedar fence or cedar gate that encloses. So it'll be closed on all four sides.
Any further comments, concerns, or questions? Okay, we will move to the findings.
Board of Zoning Appeals of the City of Jeffersonville, having heard the application for variance described above and all opposition from parties claiming to be adversely affected thereby, does now enter the following findings. 1, the variance of the development standards will not be injurious to the public health, safety, moral, and general welfare of the community. Mr. Avery.
Agree.
Mr. Fox.
Agree.
Mr. Stinson. Mr. Clark.
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon.
Agree.
2, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. Mr. Fox.
Agree.
Mr. Stinson. Mr. Clark.
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon.
Agree.
Mr. Avery.
Agree.
3, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in a practical difficulty. This situation shall not be self-imposed nor be based on a perceived reduction of or restriction of economic gain. Mr. Fox.
Agree.
Mr. Stinson. Mr. Clark.
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon.
Agree.
Mr. Avery.
Agree.
Based on the findings described above, the board does now approve this application, so ordered this 28th day of April, 2020.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Mr. Merkley, are you okay with everything so far?
Yes.
Thank you. John Martin and Partners Incorporated filed a special exception application for a property at 3418 East 10th Street. The property is zone C2, which is commercial. The proposed development is an instant oil change facility. The docket number is BZA-20-21. Do we have representation?
Yes. Phil Gambrell, Prism Engineering, 2309 Waterston Trail, Louisville, 40299. And yes, I received the oath.
Thank you.
This particular site is, as with a few of the others tonight, a very unusually shaped lot. It's triangular shaped, wide in the front, very narrow in the back. The variances that we are requesting at this time are one in the C2 zoning. It's a minimum of a 2-acre lot. This particular lot is existing C2 and it's only 1.27 acres. The other variance is in the C2 zoning. There's a minimum of 5,000 square foot for the building footprint. And this particular style of a 4-bay Jiffy Lube is only 3,438 square feet. And also the third variance would be for the gabled roof, which these style of commercial facilities are flat roofs with screened mechanical on top. It's about all I have, but if anyone has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
If I may interject, the hearing in front of us is for the special exception request. This project is in the commercial corridor overlay district, and therefore oil change facility would only be allowed by special request.
Jump the gun a little bit.
That's okay.
Okay, at this point in time, we'll open up for public comment. Chad, do you have anything to bring forth?
I do not.
And Ms. Moore downstairs, are we good? All right. We'll close public comment at this point in time. Does the board have any concerns, comments, or questions about this project?
We're only doing 2021 right now, the special exception, right?
Correct. You're just determining whether this is an acceptable request for a special exception.
Motion to move the findings.
Sounds good. The Board of Zoning Appeals of the City of Jeffersonville, having heard the application for special exception described above and all opposition from parties claiming to be adversely affected thereby, does now enter the following findings. 1, the special exception will not be injurious to the public health, safety, moral, and general welfare of the community. Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. Stinson? Mr. Clark?
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon?
I agree.
Mr. Avery?
Agree.
2, the requirements and development standards for the requested use as prescribed by this ordinance will be met. Mr. Stinson? Mr. Clark?
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Agree.
Mr. Avery?
Agree.
Mr. Fox?
Agree.
3, granting the special exception will not subvert the general purposes served by this ordinance and will not permanently injure other property or uses in the same district and vicinity. Mr. Clark?
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Agree.
Mr. Avery?
Agree.
Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. Stinson? 4, the proposed use will be consistent with the character of the district therein, the spirit and intent of the zoning ordinance, and the Jeffersonville Comprehensive Plan. Mr. McCutcheon?
Agree.
Mr. Avery?
Agree.
Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. Stinson? Mr. Clark?
Agree.
Based on the findings described above, the board does now approve this application, so ordered this 28th day of April 2020. With that, we will move on to the variance request.
At this point in time, John Marth with, I'm going to butcher this probably, but Guggenheim Partners, and you can correct me when we get there, Incorporated, filed a development standards variance application for a property at 3418 East 10th Street The property is zone C2 commercial. The proposed development is an instant oil change facility. The docket number is BZA 2022. Do we have representation?
Yes. Once again, it's Phil Gambrell, Prism Engineering, 2309 Waterston Trail, Louisville, Kentucky 40299. As I stated the reasons earlier, little too soon, but they're fairly straightforward variances to be requested.
At this moment in time, we'll open up for public comment. Is there any, Chad, do you have anything to add?
I do not, no.
I don't believe there's anything downstairs with Ms. Moore, so we'll move on. We'll close public comment at this point in time and open up for the board for any comments, concerns, or questions. If seeing none, we'll move forward with the findings.
The Board of Zoning Appeals of the City of Jeffersonville, having heard the application for variance described above and all opposition from parties claiming to be adversely affected thereby, does now enter the following findings. 1, the variance of the development standards will not be injurious to the public health, safety, moral, and general welfare of the community. Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. Stinson? Mr. Clark?
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Agree.
Mr. Avery?
Agree.
2, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. Mr. Clark?
Agree.
Mr. Stinson? Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. Avery?
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Agree.
3, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in a practical difficulty. The situation shall not be self-imposed nor be based on a perceived reduction of or restriction of economic gain. Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. Avery?
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Agree.
Mr. Clark?
Agree.
Mr. Stinson? Based on the findings described above, the board does now approve this application, so ordered this 28th day of April 2020.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you. For those of you who may not have paperwork in front of you, we have 2 to go. Hang in there. Jack Cutter filed a development standards variance application for a property in the 4200 block of Town Center Boulevard. The property is zone C2 PD, which is a planned development. The proposed development is a commercial strip center. The docket number is BZA-20-23. Do we have representation?
Josh Hillman with Jacoby Toombs and Lands Engineers, 1829 East Spring Street, New Albany. Acknowledge the oath.
Thank you.
Would you like me to go ahead and give a brief discussion?
Yes, if you don't mind, please.
The 2 developments, the current one, which is BZA 2023, also known as VP11, located directly behind Wild Eggs on Town Center Boulevard, just south of Veterans Parkway. The variance and waivers that are being requested here tonight are consistent with some of the other variances and waivers, lighting and landscape foundation plantings. Just keeps it consistent with the other developments in the area. No other comments.
Okay. At this point in time, we'll open up for public comment. Chad, do you have anything?
We do not.
Okay, and I'm assuming Ms. Moore downstairs is good. And at this point in time, we'll close public comment. Does the board have any comments, concerns, or questions based upon the 4200 block of Town Center Boulevard?
No.
Seeing none, we'll move for the findings, please.
Board of Zoning Appeals of the City of Jeffersonville, having heard the application for variance described above and all opposition from parties claiming to be adversely affected thereby, does now enter the following findings. 1, the variance of the development standards will not be injurious to the public health, safety, moral, and general welfare of the community. Mr. Stinson? Mr. Clark?
Agree.
Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Agree.
Mr. Avery?
Agree.
2, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. Mr. Fox,
Agree.
Mr. Stinson, Mr. Clark,
Agree.
Mr. Avery,
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon.
Agree.
3, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in a practical difficulty. The situation shall not be self-imposed nor be based on a perceived reduction of or restriction of economic gain. Mr. Stinson, Mr. Fox,
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon,
Agree.
Mr. Avery,
Agree.
Mr. Clark.
Agree.
Based on the findings described above, the board does now approve this application. So ordered this 28th day of April, 2020.
Thank you. Jack Cutter filed a development standards variance application for the property in the 1500 block of Veterans Parkway. The property is zone C2 PD, which is planned development. The proposed development is a commercial strip center. The docket number is BZA-20-24. Do we have representation?
Josh Hillman with Kobe Toombs and Lands Engineers, acknowledgement of the oath. This development variance request, very similar to the one you just saw. It's about 1,000 feet away from the same location of the other, directly adjacent to the recently constructed, I think it's Chicken Salad Chick is a building that's there right now. The variances being requested today keep this development in line with the adjacent development and the others that have previously on the other side of Town Center Boulevard.
Thank you. At this point in time, we'll open up for public comment. Chad, do we have anything?
We do not.
And Ms. Moore downstairs, I'm assuming we're good to go. All right, at this point in time, we'll close public comment. Is there anything from the board? Any questions, comments, or concerns from the board? Seeing none, we'll move to the findings.
The Board of Zoning Appeals of the City of Jeffersonville, having heard the application for variance described above and all opposition from parties claiming to be adversely affected thereby, does now enter the finding followings. 1, the variance of the development standards will not be injurious to the public health, safety, moral, and general welfare of the community. Mr. Avery?
Agree.
Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. Clark?
Agree.
Mr. Stinson? Mr. McCutcheon?
Agree.
2, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. Mr. Avery?
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Agree.
Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. Stinson? Mr. Clark?
Agree.
3, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in a practical difficulty. This situation shall not be self-imposed nor be based on a perceived reduction or restriction of economic gain. Mr. Fox?
Agree.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Agree.
Mr. Stinson? Mr. Clark?
Agree.
Mr. Avery?
Agree.
Based on the findings described above, the board does now approve this application, so ordered this 28th day of April, 2020.
Thank you all.
Thank you. At this point in time, that would conclude the agenda that I had in front of me. Would the director like to say anything?
I'd just like to say thanks for everyone for being patient with us and working with us on this Zoom meeting. Hopefully, we're not sure what's going to happen next at the end of this month, but we will have another BZA meeting. It may be a Zoom meeting. It may not be. It may be partially one and partially the other. We'll have to sort that out, but stay tuned.
Okay. I personally like to thank everybody for bearing with me and getting through this. It worked out pretty well. We need to keep the city forward, progress moving. Mr. Merkley, do you have anything?
It went very well. I thought did a great job.
Thank you. I have nothing further. Is the host ready to close out? Can we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn accepted. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Well, that was